The evening sun painted the Arizona desert gold, its light touching the slow river that curled between the canyons. Luke Carter, a quiet cowboy in his mid-30s, guided his tired horse along the dusty trail. He had spent most of his life alone, moving from one ranch job to another, never staying long enough to be known. Folks said he was a man of few words, but behind those pale blue eyes lived memories he didn't talk about. Memories of a war that left him both brave and broken. As he rode along the riverbank, Luke noticed the sound of rushing water grow louder. The river was high from the recent rains, its current stronger than usual. He slowed his horse, scanning the water. Then he saw it, something or someone caught in the middle of the current. For a moment he thought it was driftwood, but then a hand moved. "Hold on!" he shouted, jumping off his horse. The figure disappeared under the water. Without thinking, Luke tore off his jacket and boots and ran into the freezing river. The cold bit through him like a knife, but he pushed forward, arms cutting through the current as he fought to reach the spot where the figure went under. He dove deep, eyes burning from the silt and debris. His hand brushed against fabric, then skin. He grabbed hold and kicked upward with all his strength, pulling the person toward the surface. When they broke through, he gasped for air, dragging the limp body toward the shore. It was a woman. Her long, dark hair clung to her face, her clothes heavy with water. She looked young, maybe in her 20s. Her skin had a warm copper tone, and the delicate beadwork on her dress told Luke she was Apache. His heart pounded as he laid her gently on the sand. She wasn't breathing. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling. "Come on, don't you die on me," he muttered. He tilted her head back like he remembered from his army days, pressing his ear close to her mouth. No breath, no heartbeat he could hear. Panic surged through him. He placed his hands over her chest and began pressing down, counting softly to himself. 1, 2, 3. He leaned down and gave her air, then pushed again. Minutes felt like hours. He refused to stop. Then, with a sudden gasp, she coughed, water spilling from her mouth. Luke let out a deep breath of relief. She turned her head weakly, her eyes fluttering open for a second. Her gaze met his, dark, fierce, confused. Then she lost consciousness again. Luke quickly wrapped his coat around her to keep her warm. The sun had almost set, and the desert night would soon turn cold. He knew she couldn't survive the night by the river. Lifting her carefully into his arms, Luke carried her to his horse. She was light, fragile, but her presence felt heavy with something he couldn't name. He placed her in front of him on the saddle, holding her steady as he guided the horse toward his cabin a few miles away. The ride was silent except for the sound of hooves and her faint breathing. Luke glanced at her face now and then, her lips slightly parted, her hair tangled with river reeds. Something about her stirred an ache in him. He didn't know who she was or why she had been in the river, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her. By the time he reached his cabin, the stars were out. The small log house stood alone on the edge of the canyon, the kind of place where silence was a companion. He dismounted and carried her inside, laying her on his bed near the fireplace. Then he lit the fire, watching the flames come alive and chase away the chill. He sat beside her, wringing the water from her hair with a towel. She was still unconscious, breathing shallow but steady. Her dress was torn at one shoulder, revealing a faint bruise. Luke frowned. Someone had hurt her. He found an old shirt and blanket, hesitating for a moment before changing her into dry clothes. He worked carefully, making sure to keep her dignity, his hands shaking not from desire but from respect and worry. When he was done, he tucked the blanket around her and sat back in his chair, staring at her face in the firelight. She was beautiful in a quiet, strong way. Her cheekbones were high, her lashes long, and even in sleep she looked proud, like someone born to lead. Luke rubbed his face tiredly. "What did I just get myself into?" he murmured. He stayed up most of the night, watching over her. Every now and then she stirred, whispering something in a language he didn't understand. Once she said a word softly, "Tien." Luke wondered if that was her name. Outside, a coyote howled, the sound lonely and far away. Luke poured himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, thinking. If she was Apache, her people might be nearby. He had heard stories. White men who wandered into Apache territory without permission often didn't come back. Saving her might have been the right thing to do, but it could also bring danger. When dawn came, the light painted her face golden. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking at the unfamiliar room. For a moment she looked frightened, then her gaze found Luke sitting quietly by the fire. You're safe, he said gently. You almost drowned. I pulled you out. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved around the cabin, then back to him. Why? She whispered, her voice rough and weak. Why what? He asked. Why save me? She said. Luke smiled faintly. Would have been a sin to just watch you die. She studied him for a moment, then looked away. You should not have touched me, she said softly. The words hit him like a stone. I was trying to save your life. Her dark eyes met his again, full of something like fear and sadness. You don't understand, she said. You have changed everything. Luke frowned, confused. What do you mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her head toward the fire, silent tears slipping down her cheek. He wanted to ask more, but something in her face told him to let her be. He sat quietly, listening to the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. The morning passed slowly. She drank a little water and fell asleep again. Luke went outside to feed his horse and fetch wood, his mind full of questions. By the time he returned, she was sitting up, staring at the beaded necklace around her neck. She held it tightly, whispering words under her breath. Luke stood in the doorway, unsure if he should speak. Finally, he said, I'm Luke Carter. What's your name? She hesitated, then said, Tyann. So he had heard right. Nice to meet you, Tyann, he said softly. She looked at him with quiet sorrow. You don't know what you have done, Luke Carter, she said. By saving me, by giving me your breath. Now you are bound to me. My people will come. Luke's stomach tightened. Bound to you? What does that mean? Her gaze didn't waver. You'll see soon, she said. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance even though the sky was clear. Luke looked out the window uneasily. The wind had changed, and for the first time since the war, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. He didn't know it yet, but saving Tyann had set something in motion that neither of them could stop. The morning air outside the cabin felt strange, heavy, as if the wind carried whispers. Luke stepped out with his coffee mug, looking over the horizon. The sun climbed slow and red, painting the desert gold again. His horse grazed nearby, but the animal seemed uneasy, ears flicking at unseen sounds. Luke's hand rested on the mug, but his thoughts were far from calm. Inside, Tyann sat near the fire, silent. Her dark eyes followed him every time he moved. She had woken at dawn and asked for little, just water and warmth, but her expression stayed distant, almost afraid. Luke didn't know what to make of her words from last night. You are bound to me, she had said, like it was some kind of curse or sacred truth. He tried to brush it off. He was a cowboy, not a man for old legends or tribal superstitions, but something about her voice, about the way she said it, made him uneasy. When he came back inside, she was tracing a pattern on the blanket with her fingers. You should take me to my people, she said quietly. Luke hesitated. You're still weak. You need rest. I will rest when I am home, she said firmly. Her tone had strength now, the kind that reminded him she wasn't just anyone. She carried herself like someone raised with pride. Your village, Luke asked slowly. How far is it? She looked toward the north, her face thoughtful. A few miles beyond the canyon, but... She paused, eyes flicking to him. If they see you with me, they may not listen before they strike. Luke gave a dry smile. Sounds like I'll be shot for trying to save a life. Tyann looked down. Among my people, life and spirit are tied together. When you gave me your breath, it joined our spirits. They will see that as more than saving. They will see it as a union. Luke blinked, unsure if he heard her right. Oh, what now? Her voice was calm, but her eyes trembled. They will think we are bound as man and woman. To them, giving breath is giving life, and life shared is sacred. It cannot be undone. Luke stared at her, speechless. You're telling me they'll think I married you? She didn't answer, just stared at the fire. He rubbed the back of his neck. Well, that's something. But it ain't true. You were dying, and I did what I had to. She finally looked at him. Truth does not matter when belief rules the heart. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Then what do we do? Tyann lowered her eyes. You must take me there before they come for me. If they find me here, they may see your home as a place of claim. It would mean you have taken me, and that would bring anger. Luke nodded slowly. All right. We'll go after you've had something to eat. He cooked a little porridge on the fire. She ate quietly, her movements graceful even in silence. When she finished, she stood up and walked to the window. The sunlight caught her face, and for a moment Luke just watched her, not sure what he was feeling. She had nearly died yesterday, yet now she stood tall, like someone meant for bigger things. He saddled the horse and helped her up. The moment his hands touched her waist, she stiffened but didn't pull away. They rode out through the open desert, wind whipping across their faces. The land stretched endlessly, sand, rock, and dry bushes scattered like memories of a forgotten world. Hours passed. They crossed a shallow ravine and climbed a ridge that overlooked a wide valley. Tyan pointed to a faint trail leading into the trees below. "That way," she said softly. Luke followed her directions, the path growing narrower and quieter. Then the air shifted. He didn't hear it at first, but Tyan did. Her hand gripped his arm. "Stop," he froze. Out of the shadows ahead, riders appeared. 5, then 10, then more. Apache warriors on horseback, faces painted, bows and rifles in hand. Their eyes locked on Luke instantly. Tyan whispered something in her language, her tone calm but firm. The warriors stopped a few yards away, forming a half-circle around them. One man rode forward. His hair was long and streaked with silver. He wore a necklace of eagle feathers and a look that spoke of command. "Tyan," he said in their language first, then turned to Luke, his eyes narrowing. "You are the one who took her." "I saved her," Luke said slowly, raising his hands slightly. "She fell in the river. I pulled her out." The chief's eyes hardened. "You gave her your breath?" Luke hesitated. I gave her air so she could live." The warriors murmured among themselves. The chief's jaw tightened. "Then it is true. You have joined with her. Among us, breath given is spirit shared." Tyan stepped forward quickly. "Father, he did not know. He only meant to help me." The chief's expression softened only a little. "You speak as if I should forgive him, my daughter. But the law is older than both of you." Luke's stomach dropped. "Daughter?" he whispered. He looked at Tyan in shock. She lowered her head. "He is Chief Nantan, leader of our people." Luke blinked, realization washing over him. He hadn't just saved any woman. He had saved the daughter of an Apache chief. The chief dismounted and came closer, studying Luke's face. "You are a man of the plains, not of our blood. But you have touched what was not meant for you. Now you must face the spirit's decision." "I didn't mean any disrespect," Luke said quietly. "I just couldn't let her die." The chief's gaze was deep and unreadable. A good heart sometimes walks into storms it cannot see. He looked at his men. "Bring them to camp." Tyan tried to protest, but the warriors surrounded them. Luke felt his reins taken from his hands. They led the horse down the trail to a hidden valley filled with tents and smoke from small fires. The air smelled of cedar and earth. Children ran. Elders watched. And silence followed wherever Tyan and Luke passed. They were taken to a large tent near the center. Inside, the air was cool and dim. The chief motioned for Luke to sit. Tyan sat beside her father, her eyes full of worry. "You saved my daughter," the chief began. "For that there is honor. But you also crossed into the sacred bond. You cannot walk away untouched." Luke tried to stay calm. "Tell me what I can do to fix this." The chief's voice was quiet but firm. "The spirits will decide. Tonight there will be a ceremony. If they see your heart as pure, you may go. If not, your life will belong to the tribe." Luke met Tyan's eyes. She looked frightened but didn't speak. The rest of the day passed slowly. Children peeked at the strange cowboy, whispering. Women brought him food, though none smiled. Tyan stayed near her father's tent, speaking softly with the elders. When she finally came to him at dusk, the sky burned orange. "They will test you," she said. "Do not speak unless asked. Do not show fear." Luke gave a tired smile. "Fear? I've lived through worse." She shook her head. "Not like this." When night fell, drums began to sound, low, steady, ancient. The tribe gathered around a great fire. Luke stood beside Tyan, his heart heavy. The chief lifted his hands to the sky and began to chant. Sparks rose into the dark air like stars. A circle was drawn around Luke, and the chief sprinkled ash across his shoulders. "You gave breath," he said solemnly. "Now the spirits will breathe judgment upon you." The wind shifted. The fire flared suddenly high, its light bright enough to show Tyan's tear-streaked face. Luke stood still, not knowing if this was magic, tradition, or fate. Then, in the glow of the fire, something strange happened. The smoke twisted and formed shapes, an eagle, a river, and two figures joined by a single thread of light. The tribe murmured in awe. The chief's voice trembled. "The spirits have spoken. The bond is real. Tyann gasped softly. Luke didn't understand what he saw, but he felt it deep in his chest, a warmth spreading like the moment he had pulled her from the water. The chief turned to him with solemn eyes. You are now one of us, Cowboy. But this bond carries a price that neither of you yet knows. The fire crackled louder, and somewhere in the desert, thunder rolled again. Luke realized this was only the beginning. The night after the ceremony, the air inside the Apache Valley was still and heavy, like the land itself was waiting. Luke sat near the edge of the fire, his thoughts tangled between disbelief and confusion. Around him, the tribe moved quietly, avoiding his eyes. He could feel their stares, some curious, some cold. The ceremony had changed everything. He looked down at his hands, remembering the way the fire had flared, the way the smoke had formed two figures joined by light. Even now he could still feel a strange warmth inside his chest, like something unseen had tied him to Tyann. He didn't understand it, but he could not deny it either. Tyann sat on the other side of the fire, her face lit by the flames. She hadn't spoken much since the ritual ended. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away as though she feared what it meant. Luke wanted to ask her 1,000 questions, but he held back. He didn't want to make her more uneasy than she already was. When the chief finally approached, the tribe fell silent. His presence carried quiet authority, the kind that needed no words. Luke Carter, he said, you saved my daughter's life. For that, our people honor you, but the spirits have shown a bond between you and her. You must remain here until the spirits release you. Luke stood up, unsure what to say. Remain here? For how long? The chief looked at the fire. Until the signs change. Until the wind and stars say it is time. Luke frowned. That could be days. Or years. The chief nodded slowly. The spirits do not count time as men do. Tyann looked at her father, her hands tightening on her lap. Father, please. He has no tribe here, no kin. He will be lost. The chief's gaze softened a little. Then teach him, my daughter. If the spirits tied you, they will teach both of you what that means. With that, he walked away, leaving Luke and Tyann staring at each other across the fire. The silence between them felt heavy. Luke finally sighed. I didn't ask for this, Tyann. I know, she said quietly. But neither did I. Yet now it is done. He rubbed the back of his neck. So, what do we do? She looked into the fire. We live until the bond tells us what it wants. The next morning, Luke woke to the sound of horses and drums. The village was alive with movement, men sharpening spears, women grinding corn, children running between tents. Tyann was outside speaking with a group of women, her posture calm but distant. When she saw Luke step out, she walked toward him with a small bowl of food. You should eat, she said softly. The path ahead is long, even when it stands still. He smiled faintly. That sounds like something from a book. It's something my mother used to say, she replied. He took the bowl and nodded. Thank you. Days passed. Luke learned to help with simple tasks, chopping wood, carrying water, repairing fences near the horses. Some of the younger men watched him closely, whispering when they thought he couldn't hear. A few smiled in quiet respect after seeing his skill with tools, but most kept their distance. Tyann stayed near him often, teaching him words in her language, explaining their customs, guiding him on how to move without offense. At first, their conversations were short, awkward. But as days turned into weeks, the silence between them began to change. It grew softer, easier. One evening, as the sun sank behind the red cliffs, they sat by the river. The same river that had nearly taken her life. Tyann dipped her hand in the water, watching the ripples spread. I used to come here as a child, she said quietly. My mother said the river listens to the hearts of those who stand beside it. She said it remembers. Luke looked at the current. Then it remembers nearly taking you away. Tyann smiled faintly. Perhaps it remembers being kind at the last moment. He glanced at her. You really believe all this? The spirits, the bond, the signs. She turned to him. You don't? He shrugged. I've seen strange things in war. Men live when they should die, and others die when they should live. Maybe that's the same thing as spirits deciding. Tyann studied him for a moment. You carry something heavy, she said. I can see it in your eyes. Luke looked away. We all carry something. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the grass, and the smell of pine drifted down from the hills. Then Tyann said softly, When you gave me breath, I felt warmth, like fire after a long winter. I thought it was only life returning, but now, sometimes I feel it still. Like something connecting us. Luke turned to her, surprised. You feel that too? She nodded slowly. Yes, it frightens me. He wanted to tell her it frightened him too, but the words wouldn't come. The next day, an unexpected visitor rode into the valley, a white trader named Amos Reed. He came once a month to trade goods with the tribe. When he saw Luke, his eyes widened. Carter, is that you? Folks been saying you vanished weeks ago, Luke explained briefly, careful not to mention the spirit bond. Amos laughed nervously. Well, I'll be damned. You living with Apaches now? Careful, cowboy. That's a good way to get yourself scalped. Tyann, standing nearby, understood the tone, if not every word. She stepped forward, her eyes cold. He is here under protection, she said in firm English. Amos blinked in surprise. You speak English? Better than you speak respect, she said sharply. Luke almost smiled but stopped himself. Easy, Tyann, Amos snorted, adjusting his hat. Suit yourself, partner. But if I were you, I'd find a way back before they change their minds about keeping you alive. When Amos rode away, Tyann looked at Luke. Your people fear what they don't understand. He nodded. So do yours. That night, as the moon rose full and bright, the tribe gathered again. This time it was not for a ceremony, but for a council. A hunter had been wounded by soldiers patrolling near the borderlands, and anger was spreading among the men. Luke sat at the edge, listening quietly. He could feel the tension rising like thunder before a storm. Chief Nantan raised his hand. We will not strike first, he said. But if they cross into our land again, they will meet our answer. Some younger warriors protested loudly, their eyes burning with revenge. Tyann stepped forward. The spirits brought us signs of union and peace, not blood. We must listen. Her father nodded approvingly. My daughter speaks with wisdom. Then one of the warriors pointed at Luke. How can we trust peace when a white man sits among us? Murmurs spread through the crowd. Luke felt every eye turn toward him. Tyann's hand instinctively moved toward her father's arm, but Luke stood up slowly. You don't have to trust me, he said quietly. But I didn't come here to harm anyone. I pulled her from that river because I couldn't watch someone die. That's all. The warrior frowned. And now you live among us, sharing food, sharing breath. Why? Luke met his gaze. Maybe because your chief asked me to stay. Maybe because I want to understand instead of fear. For a long moment there was silence. Then the chief spoke. Enough. The spirits placed him here for a reason. Let no man question that again. The crowd slowly dispersed, though not all looked convinced. Tyann looked at Luke with quiet gratitude. Later, when they returned to her tent, she said softly, You spoke with courage. He smiled faintly. Guess I've done a lot of foolish things lately. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, The foolish ones are often the ones who change fate. The wind outside shifted, bringing the sound of coyotes in the distance. Luke looked out into the dark. He could feel the bond again, faint but strong, like a pulse not his own beating beside his heart. He didn't know what the spirits wanted, but deep down he feared that the price the chief spoke of was drawing closer. The next few weeks passed quietly in the valley, but the peace was uneasy. Luke had grown used to the Apache camp. The smell of smoke at sunrise, the sound of children laughing near the stream, the rhythm of drums echoing through the hills. Yet every night when he lay under the stars, he could feel the strange pull in his chest, that invisible bond the ceremony had sealed between him and Tyann. Sometimes, he would glance across the fire and find her looking at him too. Neither spoke of it anymore, but both felt it. The connection was silent, like the space between heartbeats. Luke began to help the hunters repair tools and mend saddles. The tribe no longer looked at him with the same suspicion, though a few still whispered behind his back. Tyann's father, Chief Nantan, often watched him from a distance as if weighing the kind of man his daughter had been tied to by fate. One evening, Tyann came to him carrying a small woven basket. My father asked that you join him by the river, she said. Luke nodded and followed her through the darkening valley. When they reached the riverbank, the chief stood there waiting, his face lit by moonlight. He gestured for Luke to sit. The world beyond these hills grows restless, the chief said. Our scouts saw soldiers 2 days' ride from here. They build new camps. More wagons come each week, Luke nodded. They're pushing west, claiming land. It won't stop soon. The chief's eyes were calm but sad. They say the land belongs to the government. But the land belongs to no man. It listens only to those who respect it. Tyann knelt beside her father. If the soldiers come here, they will bring war again. The chief nodded slowly. That is why I called you both. The bond between you was not given by chance. It means something, though I do not yet know what. The spirits may have joined you for a reason, to stop what is coming. Luke frowned. How could I stop a war? You cannot alone, said the chief. But hearts joined by spirit can move more than armies if the bond is pure. Luke didn't understand, but he could see the worry in the old man's eyes. If soldiers come, Luke said, I can speak to them. I know how they think. The chief studied him carefully. Would you do that for us? Luke nodded. For her. For all of you. The chief placed a hand on his shoulder. Then may the spirits guide your words when the time comes. That night, Tyann and Luke walked back together in silence. The air was cool and clear, the stars endless above them. After a while, Tyann spoke softly. You would risk yourself for us? Luke shrugged. I reckon I already have. She stopped walking, turning toward him. You could have left after the ceremony. You could have run. I thought about it, he admitted. But every time I looked at that river, I remembered pulling you from it. I can't turn my back on what started there. Her voice lowered. You speak like someone who believes in more than what he sees. He smiled faintly. Maybe you're rubbing off on me. For the first time, she laughed, a small, gentle sound that made his chest ache in a way he didn't expect. Days passed. The tribe began preparing for the worst. Scouts reported more soldiers moving nearby. Luke could sense the fear in the air, though everyone tried to hide it. He offered to ride out to speak with the soldiers before things turned bad, and Chief Nantan agreed, though Tyann protested fiercely. They will not listen to you, she said. To them you are still one of us now. Luke rested his hand on her shoulder. Then maybe that's what they need to see, that I'm both. Maybe that'll make them stop before it's too late. Tyann's eyes filled with worry. If they harm you, the spirits will never forgive it. He smiled gently. Then I'll make sure they don't have to. The next morning, before dawn, Luke saddled his horse. The tribe gathered quietly to see him off. The chief placed a hand on his arm. Go with truth, he said, but do not forget the bond that protects you. Tyann stepped forward, holding a small piece of cloth woven with beads. Take this, she said softly. It will remind you of the river. Luke took it carefully. I'll come back, he said. I will wait, she whispered. He rode out into the desert. The rising sun turned the sand into gold, and for hours the only sound was the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves. When he finally saw the soldiers' camp, it stood like a scar against the land. Wooden wagons, flags, and men in blue uniforms. He slowed his horse, raising one hand in peace. Don't shoot, he called. I'm not your enemy. Two soldiers pointed rifles at him, but an officer rode forward. Identify yourself. Name's Luke Carter, he said. Used to serve with the 12th Cavalry. The officer frowned. You're a long way from the fort, Carter. What's your business? I came from the Apache Valley west of here, Luke said carefully. They know you're close. They don't want trouble, but if you move into that canyon, there will be blood. The officer's expression hardened. We've got orders to secure the region. If the Indians resist, we'll deal with it. Luke's jaw tightened. They're not your enemy. They're defending their homes. You start a fight there, you'll bury good men for no reason. The officer dismounted, stepping close. You sound like you've gone native, Carter. You living with them? Luke didn't answer. That's what I thought, the officer said coldly. We'll move out in 2 days. You tell your friends in the hills to clear out, or we'll clear them out ourselves. Luke's stomach twisted. You don't understand. Enough, the officer barked. You're dismissed. Luke clenched his fists but turned away. He rode hard back through the canyon, the anger burning in him. When he reached the valley by nightfall, Tyann was waiting by the river, her eyes searching the dark. When she saw him, she ran toward him, relief flooding her face. You came back, she breathed. They're coming, Luke said quietly. 2 days. Her face paled. Then the spirits warned true. Chief Nantan gathered the warriors that night. The fire crackled high as Luke told them what he had heard. They won't listen to reason, he said. They'll come armed. The chief's voice was calm. Then we will meet them with more than steel. The spirits will decide who is right. Luke looked at Tyann standing near the firelight, her face full of quiet fear. He couldn't let harm come to her. "Let me go back once more," he said. "I'll try again before blood is spilled." Tyann shook her head. "You will only be caught between both sides." "Maybe," he said, "but if I don't try, I'll never forgive myself." That night, Tyann found him by the edge of the river. The moonlight shone on the water like glass. She stood close, the wind moving her dark hair. "If you die, the bond dies too," she whispered. "Do you understand that?" He looked at her gently. Maybe it was never about living or dying. Maybe it was about what we do with the time we're given. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his heart. For a moment, he felt warmth. Deep, steady, alive. "The river joined us once," she said softly. "If the spirits will it, it will save us again." Luke placed his hand over hers. "Then I'll trust the river and you." The wind grew stronger, bending the tall grass. Far in the distance, faint flashes of light touched the horizon, campfires from the advancing soldiers. Luke knew dawn would bring something that would change all of them forever. He looked once more at Tyann, memorizing her face in the moonlight. Neither of them spoke as he turned and walked back toward the village, where the people waited in silence, preparing for the coming storm. And somewhere deep in the hills, thunder echoed again, soft, distant, like a warning carried by the spirits themselves. The dawn came slowly, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red. The air was cold and heavy with silence. Every sound, the rustle of grass, the distant cry of a hawk, felt sharper, like the world was holding its breath before something terrible. Luke stood near the river, tightening the saddle on his horse. Tyann stood a few steps away, watching him with eyes full of worry. Neither spoke for a long time. The bond between them felt stronger now, almost alive. It was like they could sense each other's thoughts without words. Finally, Tyann said softly, "If you go to them again, they will not listen. The spirits have shown it in my dreams." Luke looked at her, his face calm but tired. "Maybe not, but I can't just stand by and watch people die on both sides. I've seen enough graves in my life." Tyann stepped closer. "You cannot fight both worlds, Luke Carter. One will destroy the other." He gave a faint smile. "Then maybe I can be the bridge between them." She shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "The bridge always breaks first." He didn't answer. He simply reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "If it breaks, I'll still be glad I built it." He mounted his horse, looking down at her one last time. "Tell your father to keep the people back until noon. After that, if I don't return, do what you must." Tyann's lips trembled. "The river brought you to me. Don't let it take you away again." Luke nodded once and rode off. The rising sun cast long shadows behind him as he galloped across the desert. Each mile brought him closer to the soldiers' camp and closer to danger. The memory of the war years came back, the shouting, the smoke, the screams, but this time he wasn't fighting for glory. He was fighting for peace. When he reached the camp, soldiers were already packing their rifles and loading wagons. The officer from before stood near a map table, barking orders. Luke slowed his horse, raising one hand high. "Hold your fire. I just want to talk," he shouted. The officer turned, glaring. "Carter again? You should have stayed where you belong." Luke dismounted and walked forward. "You don't have to do this. They're not preparing for war, they're defending their homes. If you attack, you'll be killing families, not fighters." The officer crossed his arms. "Orders are orders. They've ignored every treaty. We push forward by noon." Luke's jaw tightened. "Then I'll stand between you and them." The officer laughed coldly. "You'd stand against your own people?" "I'm standing for what's right," Luke said. "You start this, you'll regret it till your dying day." For a moment the officer's expression wavered, but pride quickly returned to his face. "Arrest him," he ordered. Two soldiers stepped forward, grabbing Luke's arms. He didn't fight back. They tied his hands and led him to a supply wagon. Luke struggled against the ropes but couldn't break free. Hours passed and the sun climbed higher. At the edge of the horizon, the dust of the Apache Valley shimmered faintly. Luke's heart raced. He knew Tyann and her people would be watching, waiting for the soldiers to move. He had to stop this before it began. He looked toward the sky, whispering, "Spirits, if you're real, now's the time." As if answering him, the wind shifted suddenly, strong and sharp. It blew across the camp, lifting dust into the air. Horses neighed nervously. One soldier cursed as his hat flew away. Then from the east came a low rumble, the sound of thunder, but there were no clouds. The officer frowned. "What in the—" Before he could finish, a sudden gust slammed into the camp, knocking over crates and scattering papers. In the confusion, Luke twisted his wrists against the rope. The wind tore at the knots until one came loose. He yanked hard and freed his hands. Without hesitation, he jumped onto a nearby horse and rode hard toward the canyon. Shouts followed him. Bullets whizzed through the air, but he didn't look back. The wind howled behind him, like something unseen was pushing him forward. The bond inside him pulsed strong and bright. It was as if Tyann herself was calling him through the air. When he reached the edge of the valley, he saw the Apache warriors standing ready, bows drawn, rifles loaded, faces set. Chief Nantan stood at the front, his eyes dark with sorrow. Tyann was beside him, her hair whipping in the wind, her face pale with fear. Luke rode straight toward them, shouting, "Hold your fire. They're coming, but we can stop this." Tyann ran forward as he stopped his horse. "You're hurt," she cried, seeing the rope burns on his wrists. "I've been worse," he said with a weak smile. "Listen, Tyann, the soldiers are angry, but the wind, it helped me. I think the spirits gave us a chance. We have to use it." Chief Nantan stepped closer. "The spirits have indeed spoken," he said quietly. "The river has changed its song. Something is coming." From the hills, the first line of soldiers appeared, their rifles glinting in the sunlight. The Apache warriors raised their weapons, ready to defend. Luke rode forward alone, raising his hand. "Wait," he shouted. "Don't shoot." The soldiers hesitated, confused by the lone rider between them and the enemy. The officer rode forward, scowling. "Get out of the way, Carter. Look around you," Luke yelled. "You're outnumbered by spirit, if not by men. The land doesn't want this fight. You can feel it." A sudden flash of light tore across the sky, lightning without clouds. The thunder that followed shook the ground. Horses reared and men stumbled. Tyann lifted her hands toward the sky, whispering something in her language. The wind swirled around her, carrying her voice like a song. Then the river beside them rose higher, faster as if pulled by an unseen hand. The current surged and spilled over its banks, flooding between the two sides. Everyone froze. Luke looked back at Tyann. She was still chanting softly, her eyes closed, her face glowing with calm. Chief Nantan stood beside her, steady and proud. The officer stared at the rising water, his voice shaking. "What is this?" Luke shouted back. "It's a warning. The spirits are showing mercy, don't waste it." The officer looked at his men. Some were already retreating, crossing themselves, whispering prayers. The wind roared louder until the flags tore from their poles. Finally, the officer dropped his hand. "Fall back," he shouted. Slowly, the soldiers turned their horses and began to ride away. When they were gone, the wind calmed and the river slowly returned to normal. Silence filled the valley again. Luke dismounted and walked toward Tyann, his heart pounding. She looked exhausted, swaying slightly. He caught her before she fell. "You did it," he whispered. "You stopped the fight." Her voice was faint. "Not me, the spirits. The bond only lent them my breath." He looked into her eyes, realizing what she meant. She had used their connection, his life, his energy, to call upon the power that saved them all. "You gave too much," he said softly. She smiled weakly. "When you gave me life, it became ours to share." He held her close as she closed her eyes, her breathing shallow but peaceful. The chief came forward, his eyes full of both pride and grief. "The spirits took their due," he said quietly. "But they also gave peace. The bond fulfilled its purpose." Luke shook his head. "No, she can't go like this." The chief placed a hand on his shoulder. "The river that gave her back once may yet give her again." Luke carried Tyann to the riverbank, laying her down gently. The water touched her fingers. He bent close, whispering, "Don't leave me, Tyann, not like this." A soft wind blew, and for a moment the current shimmered with light. Tyann's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him, smiling faintly. "You gave me breath once," she whispered. "Now it gives us both life." Luke felt the warmth again, the same warmth from that first night. The bond pulsed between them like a living heart. Tyann's hand tightened around his. When the tribe gathered, they saw them sitting side by the river, the sunlight touching their faces. Both were alive, breathing together, calm and still. Chief Nantan bowed his head. "The spirits have chosen mercy once more," he said. "The bond remains, strong, eternal." Days later, the soldiers never returned. The valley stayed quiet, untouched. Luke stayed with the tribe, no longer a stranger. The people came to respect him. and the chief treated him like a son. At night, Luke and Tyann would walk by the same river where they first met. The water's song was gentle now, carrying the promise of peace. He would often say, "Guess the river decided I belonged here after all." And Tyann would smile softly and answer, "The river never takes, it only gives back what's meant to be." Under the stars, with the wind whispering through the canyon, they found what neither war nor fear could destroy, a bond made by breath, sealed by spirit, and kept alive by love that asked for nothing but peace. And from that day on, the desert never spoke their names in sorrow, only in memory of a man and a woman the spirits chose to bind for life.